Tonight, will impeachment divide Democrats? The latest in the party pushing to impeach the president. Plus, a citizenship question on the 2020 census. The case being argued before the Supreme Court that could impact politics for the next decade. And how some lawmakers are weaponizing religion to stop political appointees. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The threat of impeachment looms over the president as Democrats weigh how to move forward. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The Speaker of the House walking a political tightrope, calling for further investigations into the president, all the while trying to keep Democrats from jumping on that impeachment bandwagon.
CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has more on Pelosi's push amid a Democratic rift. Abigail, the issue seems to be becoming a hot topic for 2020 hopefuls.
That's right, John. And as calls to pursue impeachment in a Democrat-held House spill onto the campaign trail, the Democrats' dilemma is front and center.
I think the American people would like to move on from this.
Senate Republicans could shoot down any House movement to remove the president.
Are you worried about impeachment, Mr. President?
The worry for Democrats, that pursuing impeachment would bring unintended consequences.
All that the Congress is talking about is impeaching Trump and Trump and Mueller. What I worry about is that works to Trump's advantage.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in an hour-long conference call with Democrats, urged caution for that very reason.
He's not worth it.
Presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar agrees.
President Trump should be held accountable.
Still, impeachment fever is spreading along the 2020 trail.
This president and his administration engaged in obstruction of justice. I believe Congress should take the steps towards impeachment.
California Senator Kamala Harris is joining Senator Elizabeth Warren's call to impeach the president.
There is no political inconvenience exception to the United States Constitution.
As for a subpoena by Democrats to provide Congress with a fully unredacted Mueller report, a Republican privy to the less redacted version called the move unnecessary.
Nothing that went any further except we had no collusion after a long and thorough investigation. We have no obstruction. It was charged. There's nothing there. Nothing per day changes those results from last week.
Georgia's Doug Collins called upon Democrats to look for themselves.
To not come here and take advantage of the Attorney General and his offer, to me, says that they're not more worried about what's in the report. They're more worried about actually scoring political points.
And today, Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton became the latest Democrat presidential candidate to call for impeachment. And the rift is sure to grow deeper as candidates continue on their way down the 2020 campaign trail.
Yeah, no doubt. Abigail, the House Judiciary Committee today issued a subpoena for former White House counsel Don McGahn to testify. What are Democrats looking for here?
Well, Don McGahn is really emerging as the chief witness in the Mueller report, and he's already cooperated with special counsel, and it's unclear what more could be derived from his testimony that's not already in the Mueller report. But Democrats want to speak with him directly. They want to dive deeper. They want to ask him to describe some of the instances that we see in the Mueller report. And right now, President Trump's current lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, they're trying to cast doubt on some of the things that Don McGahn has said. They're saying that he has different variations of things that he told Mueller during the investigations. But House Democrats want to bring him here on the Hill. They want to talk to themselves, and they want to see if there's anything that he says that could possibly be an impeachable offense by the president.
All right, Abigail Robertson for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you.
Well, joining us now is Republican strategist and political analyst John Brabender. John, you just heard Abigail's report. What are your thoughts on all this talk of impeachment?
Well, I can't help but feel like the Democrats are Charlie Brown in the football. Every time they think they have the president, they've got him. And all of a sudden, the football is pulled away and there's nothing there. But they're not going to give up. And here's the problem. I don't think Nancy Pelosi wants impeachment. I think she thinks for the House, it'll be a political nightmare. It will hurt them in 2020. but she can't control the messaging because the messaging on the left is going to be by the presidential candidates. Their first big debate is June, whatever they say. And they're trying to outposition each other for the progressive left, who is going to determine who likely is going to be the nominee. So almost all of them have come out for impeachment. The problem is, it's such a ridiculous story. What they're basically saying is, okay, the president wasn't guilty of obstruction, but he was guilty of trying to stop the very investigation that proved he wasn't guilty of, collusion. And so it makes absolutely no sense. Plus, talking about Don McGahn, he's his lawyer. And the president said, here's what I want to do. And Don McGahn said, no, we can't do that. He didn't fire Don McGahn. The president moved on. And so I don't really understand what case they could probably have other than they're trying to make this political.
Does this take you back to the 1990s when Republicans were going after President Clinton? Do you think Democrats here, John, could overplay their hand?
Yeah, I mean, look, in Washington, a lot of times people wake up drinking the political Kool-Aid of the day. And I will be first to say that our party was probably guilty of that in the 90s, particularly starting in 1994. We were going to take out Bill Clinton. And I think some bad decisions were made. I think that the Democrats right now are making horrific decisions for this country. Here's the real interesting thing is if you talk to the Democrat presidential candidates, they will admit nobody on the campaign trail is asking them questions about the Mueller report. They're asking them much bigger and more important questions for America.
What about all these other investigations Democrats are pursuing? They might not ultimately try to impeach the president, but they're definitely going to investigate the heck out of him. Do you think that's going to appease the base?
Yeah, you mean the legal firm of Schumer, Pelosi, and Schiff. Yeah, exactly. Look, that's what they want to do. They think if they do this slow drip of saying, oh, now we're going to subpoena this person. Now we're going to accuse the president of this. But here's the interesting thing. I think they are starting to overplay their hand. I think the American people are smarter than they're giving them credit for and understand that they have no intention of moving America forward. They have no intention of working with this president. They're just worried about the 2020 election.
Yeah, and 2020 Democrats pretty split on whether or not they should call for impeachment or whether or not they should move on from it. John, what would be your advice to a lot of these candidates who are in the race?
Well, I think some of them, like Bernie Sanders, came out and said, no, we shouldn't do this. Why? He actually wants to look statesmanlike. He wants to look like he could be a president. And so it's going to be a tough question for those candidates running. Do I make my base, the far left, happy, or do I look presidential by doing the right thing, the reasonable thing to do? And they're going to have that conflict and that paradox to try to solve.
So what is it specifically that you think Democrats in 2020 should be talking about?
Honestly, I think that they should be figuring out how to help middle-income families afford college better. I think that they should find a healthcare system that isn't socialism, doesn't take your right for private insurance, doesn't lead to rationing and long lines, but instead tell Americans how we're going to improve Obamacare because the rates went up so high. I think that they should talk about if they want to have a strong foreign national policy. What is their differences with Donald Trump? The truth of the matter is, I think they've come to the conclusion that they don't have a big enough distinction or positive movement among voters on issues, and that their only way to probably win 2020 is see if they can take this president down.
Yeah, what issues do you think President Trump and his campaign should be talking about?
Well, again, one of the things is I think everybody's making a mistake not talking more to millennial and Generation Z voters. They are going to make up almost 40% of the vote this time. And I think both sides have to understand that they're engaged, they're showing up, and they're willing and fluid to vote for either. And I think they want to know, how is America going to be good for them? How are they going to be able to afford jobs and a house and all these things? And I don't think that's being addressed by anybody.
Final question for you, John. Should the president be talking about impeachment? Because this seems to rally his base.
Yeah, my argument all the time is that I think the president steps on his own message in the sense that I think he gets so infuriated. And I understand, if you're accused of something falsely, you want to fight back, but unfortunately he keeps it alive.
All right, John Bravender, always good to get your insights.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, to the Supreme Court, where all eyes are on a case that could shape the political landscape for the next 10 years. It all centers on U.S. citizenship and the 2020 census. Amber Strong explains.
The Supreme Court heard opening arguments Tuesday about whether a citizenship question should be included on next year's census. The Trump administration wants to add, is this person a citizen of the United States? Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley says the question is important to the president.
He wants to know who's in this country, and I think as a sovereign nation, we have that right.
Last year, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross stated the DOJ asked for the change to help enforce the Voting Rights Act.
Can you tell me whether the Department of Commerce plans to include the citizenship question in the 2020 census?
Department of Justice, as you know, initiated the request for inclusion of the citizenship question.
Immigration groups in various states sued the government, however, arguing that's not the reason. Court documents indicate the request was initiated by Ross, not the DOJ. 3 federal judges struck down the administration's proposal, 2 calling it unconstitutional. Before the case could go to appeals, the Supreme Court stepped in. New York Attorney General Letitia James says Tuesday's battle was an important one.
Adding that particular citizenship question could lead to the undercounting in communities across America, particularly in immigrant communities and Hispanic communities. In the interest of fairness, in the interest of upholding this quintessential American promise, we are obligated to ensure the most accurate count in the 2020 census.
Defenders say most countries ask similar questions, and that the heart of the matter goes back to the founding fathers. The census is important as it affects things ranging from the number of representatives to electoral college votes to federal funding. So it's clear the impact from this decision will be felt well beyond 2020. Now, based on statements from Tuesday's arguments, the conservative justices seem to support the administration, but we should know a definite answer by late June so that the census can be printed on time. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Mike Gonzalez is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us now for more. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me on.
What do you think, Mike? Do you think adding a citizenship question would keep some from participating in the 2020 census?
I haven't seen any evidence that that is the case. The evidence that the groups on the left and some of their allies in the Census Bureau have produced has been very inconclusive. In fact, about 2 months ago, there was another study which showed that the impact would be negligible. So I don't think that whatever loss of responses there are, if there are any, because it is not a certainty that there will be any of any significance, outweigh the positive aspects of thinking of Americans in terms of citizens rather than groups.
What about the issue of accuracy, though? People are concerned that if people aren't participating, of course, how can we get a good count of who's actually here?
But I just addressed that. There isn't any evidence, really any hard evidence, that there will be an erosion of accuracy. What there is a lot of complaining and huffing and puffing by groups on the left, but when you ask them for hard evidence, any studies that shows that there will be an undercount, they don't really have the goods.
So you're saying that the people who are saying this are lying?
I didn't say they're lying. That shows intent. I think that for all I know, they do think that there will be an undercount. They just lack the evidence to show that there will be.
The U.S., Mike, used to have a citizenship question really up until, I think it was the 1950s. Why did they get rid of that? You know,
Justice Ginsburg asked that question of the Solicitor General, Noel Francisco, and he didn't have a good answer. And you know, what I would surmise is that it was around that time when the share of the foreign-born of the population became smaller and smaller and smaller. It was after 1950 because of a very restrictive immigration law that passed in 1924. So with the vast, overwhelming majority of the U.S. population being native-born and thus citizens, because of the 14th Amendment, I think the question lost its relevance. That's just my conjecture. But I would imagine that had something to do with it. Today, of course, we're again at very historical levels, close to what we had in 1910 and 1900, which was the historic high of the foreign-born.
Real quickly, Mike, what would the Supreme Court's ruling, what could it mean for future elections?
Well, nothing really for the 2020 election, for example. I think that it does open the possibility that districts and states and state legislatures may want to apportion and redistrict with citizenship rather than total population as the base, which they're allowed to, under the Constitution. The last time this was looked at, which was the Evenwell case, which I think was 2015. The court didn't express itself on that issue, said that states, in fact, Justice Thomas said that states could use citizenship if they wanted to. So it could conceivably affect future elections. I don't think it's going to affect the impending elections.
All right, Mike Gonzalez with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, today marked a national day of mourning in Sri Lanka after a wave of bombings killed more than 320 people Easter Sunday. People across the country joined in a moment of silence this morning. They also prayed for those affected by the attack. Meanwhile, ISIS today confirmed responsibility for the bombings. The government says a local Islamist militant group is responsible, but believes it received help from an international terror group. Sri Lankan officials say the bombings were in retaliation for the attack on the Christchurch, New Zealand mosques last month. While the United States is offering up to $10 million in a quest to find out who's financing Hezbollah. The State Department's Rewards for Justice program aims to end the terror group's activities by targeting their source of money, and Uncle Sam's willing to pay big to anyone who can help do that.
What sort of information are we seeking? We are welcome any information that leads to the identification and disruption of Hezbollah's financial mechanisms and individuals who manage or facilitate them. The Rewards for Justice program has been an effective law enforcement tool in our fight against international terrorism since its inception in 1984.
The State Department says it's looking into things like names, bank records, customs receipts, or evidence of real estate transactions.
Using religion against judicial nominees. Up next, the tactics some lawmakers are using against political foes. Welcome back. Well, Fox News plans to host a town hall with Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg on May 19th. Today's announcement comes as the 2020 hopeful continues his appeal to voters of faith. In a CNN town hall Monday, the South Bend mayor was asked how he plans to unite Christians with different political leanings.
And I get that one of the things about Scripture is different people see different things in it. But at the very least, we should be able to establish that God does not have a political party.
And Buttigieg pointed to his own faith and interpretation of the Bible to highlight the difference between him and President Trump, specifically pointing to how he views the poor in America, saying the administration acts as if poor people have it easy and that he views things, quote, radically different.
Well, the Constitution specifically forbids religious tests for public office, but lately this tactic is cropping up in Congress, with Democrats challenging appointees, claiming their beliefs disqualify them from office. CBS News correspondent Caitlin Burke is with us now. Caitlin, how are some of these Democrats using the practice of weaponizing religion?
Right, John. So a new line of questioning from Democrat senators is coming up far too often, and it has church leaders warning lawmakers to tread carefully. They say religion is being used as a disqualifier for public office.
The weaponization of religion means the use and exploitation of faith for partisan political ends in terms of political warfare.
In December, Democrat Senators Kamala Harris, now a presidential candidate, and Hawaii's Mazie Hirono questioned a federal judicial nominee about his membership in the Knights of Columbus, the well-known Catholic service organization. They asked Brian Bisher whether he shared the group's, quote, extremist values, and if he would be able to judge certain cases fairly.
They were taking shots at Catholics. Didn't have to be the Knights of Columbus, right? They were taking shots at Catholics regarding pro-life and their views on marriage, right? That's the bottom line. This was a case of clear ideological bigotry. It was unfair, and it is part of a larger problem that exists in the society.
Reverend Eugene Rivers, the founder and director of the Seymour Institute for Black Church and Policy Studies, says members of all faiths should defend religious liberty.
I should be free to believe in my God or to believe in no God. But in either case, I should not be subjected to some ideological test that is used as the criteria or the basis for assessing my right to engage in public life.
In 1960, Democrat John F. Kennedy worked to convince Americans that he could be both a good Catholic and a good public servant.
But if this election is decided on the basis that 40 million Americans lost their chance of being president on the day they were baptized, then it is the whole nation that will be the loser in the eyes of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world, in the eyes of history, and in the eyes of our own people.
Reverend Rivers says that if certain senators refuse to see the good contributions from people of faith, they should at least commit to uphold the Constitution. It states in Article 6, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
The Senate passed a resolution at the beginning of the year saying it would be unconstitutional to consider membership in the Knights of Columbus a disqualifying criteria for public office. It passed unanimously.
In this, we are simply reaffirming with President Kennedy and with countless other Americans across 230 years, Protestant and Catholic, Jew and Muslim, Hindu and Buddhist, agnostic, atheist, and more, we are simply reaffirming the idea that America is big enough for disagreements.
In 1960, then candidate Kennedy responded to bigotry with a warning that Dr. Rivers echoes today.
For while this year it may be a Catholic against whom the finger of suspicion is pointed, in other years it has been, and may someday be again, a Jew, or a Quaker, or a Unitarian, or a Baptist. Today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you, until the whole fabric of our harmonious society is ripped apart at a time of great national peril.
Caitlin, how have nominees responded to these kind of religious test questions?
Well, so Brian Bisher, the nominee mentioned in that story, says the Knights of Columbus official views could never represent each of their 2 million members. And so he basically just said that if he felt like a case came up where he couldn't be impartial, he would recuse himself. But really, he says his involvement with the Knights of Columbus has to do with their charitable work and community projects.
Caitlin, if you look at recent incidents of this line of questioning, oftentimes it centers around nominees who have a Catholic faith. What kind of insight have they given on why they have this line of questioning?
So really, it's not just about Catholic faith. It's about faith in general. Democrats are worried that a nominee's faith is going to shape their legal thinking. And we've seen this come up specifically regarding abortion and gay marriage. But as Brian Bisher said, if there is something that pops up where he feels he's unable to be impartial, he would recuse himself. And we've heard that echoed from other nominees as well.
All right, Caitlin Burke, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Well, coming up, a royal invitation for President Trump. The details when we come back.
President Trump is gearing up for a royal visit.
That is right. Buckingham Palace announced today the president will head to Britain for his first official state visit since taking office. The 3-day tour will take place in early June. His trip marks only the third state visit from a U.S. president. Only George W. Bush and Barack Obama received the official invitation from the Queen. The visit is expected to be full of pomp and circumstance. Those two previous state visits included horse-drawn carriage rides and banquets with the Queen at Buckingham Palace. I think they'll also have high tea.
Oh, I hope so. It's fun to watch.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.